Eu fui muito feliz jogando
Espetacular!
e as pessoas falam que eram muito felizes de me ver jogando.
Ronaldinho Gaúcho cobrou direto pro gol! Gol!
What if the real reason Ronaldinho, the one and only, matters is not that it promises another football documentary full of trophies, applause, and slowed-down highlights? But that Ronaldinho was never just a winner. He was a feeling, and that is much harder to capture. Because when people talk about Ronaldinho, they rarely start with numbers. They start with joy, with the smile, with the impossible touch. With the idea that football, for a little while, looked less like work and more like magic. That is what made him different, and that is also what makes this Netflix documentary a risk. It is easy to build a sports doc around greatness. It is much harder to build one around enchantment. That is why this trailer immediately works for me. It does not just sell a legend, it tries to sell an atmosphere. Netflix is releasing Ronaldinho, the one and only, globally on April 16, 2026 as a 3-episode limited documentary series. And the official positioning is pretty clear. This is meant to be a definitive portrait of one of football's most beloved icons, built from exclusive access, archival material, and a broader attempt to map the full rise, peak, and fallout of his life. That includes the obvious milestones, Grêmio, Brazil, Barcelona, the Ballon d'Or, the trophies, the influence, but also the more uncomfortable chapters, including the Paraguay prison episode that still hangs over his public story. And that full-spectrum approach is the only approach that makes sense. Because Ronaldinho's story was never supposed to fit neatly into a standard sports arc. He did not feel like an athlete manufactured for discipline-first greatness. He felt like a force of improvisation that somehow broke through elite football without losing its grin. He was world-class and street-level at the same time. That contradiction is what made him unforgettable. He could humiliate defenders, dominate the biggest matches, win the highest honors, and still look like somebody who had wandered into the stadium to remind everyone the game used to belong to imagination first. That is the version of Ronaldinho people fell in love with. So the challenge for the documentary is obvious. Can it preserve the myth without lying about the man? The trailer suggests it is at least trying. What I like most is that the project does not appear to be reducing him to nostalgia bait. Yes, the music, the rhythm, and the imagery are all built to remind viewers why he became such a global symbol. Netflix is even using a new music collaboration tied directly to his image and movement, which is a smart choice because Ronaldinho's football always felt musical in the first place. But beneath that celebratory tone, the official descriptions point to something more useful. This is not just a greatest hits reel, it is also about defeat, turbulence, and the parts of his life that complicated the legend. That matters because a good sports documentary should not just explain why someone was adored. It should explain what happened when adoration stopped being enough. Ronaldinho's career has always invited that kind of tension. On one hand, he is one of the purest ambassadors the sport has ever had. Even players who came after him often describe him less as an influence and more as a first love. On the other hand, his story also carries all the familiar pressure points of modern icon making: expectation, decline, public spectacle, off-field mistakes, and the brutal way charisma can both protect and distort a person's image. That is where this series could become genuinely compelling. Not in proving he was great, everybody knows that already, but in showing what happens when a man becomes so closely identified with joy that the world struggles to process his fallibility. That is a much more interesting portrait than a simple rise of a genius documentary. And the structure may actually help. 3 episodes is enough room to breathe, but not so much room that the series has to artificially inflate every chapter just to justify its existence. If the filmmakers are disciplined, that length can work in the project's favor. Ronaldinho's story does not need endless padding. It needs the right rhythm, early wonder, global explosion. The cost of becoming a symbol If the series can move through those phases without either worshipping too blindly or judging too coldly, it could land exactly where it should. The access also sounds promising. Netflix is openly emphasizing never-before-seen material and direct access to Ronaldinho himself, along with interviews from major football figures. That combination is usually where these documentaries either come alive or fall apart. Access is useful, but only if it produces insight instead of brand management. If Ronaldinho is willing to confront not just what he achieved, but what he lost, misunderstood, or mishandled, then the documentary has a real chance to be more than polished mythology. And honestly, I think that is what this story needs. Because Ronaldinho's legacy is already secure. The only thing left to explore is the human dimension behind it. The Netflix format also makes sense here. Ronaldinho was not just a football star in the old sense. He was one of the earliest truly global football personalities of the digital age, a player whose style spread across highlights, clips, commercials, memes, and iconography long before every athlete became a content ecosystem. A streaming documentary is an oddly fitting home for someone whose career helped train the internet to fall in love with football moments that look too joyful to be real. So where do I land on Ronaldinho the one and only after this trailer? I think it looks promising for one very specific reason. It seems aware that Ronaldinho cannot be explained by accomplishment alone. The trophies matter, the Ballon d'Or matters, Barcelona matters, Brazil matters. But the real challenge is explaining why he still occupies such a warm, almost mythical place in football memory even after the complications, the stumbles, and the messy final chapters. That is the mystery worth chasing. Because Ronaldinho was never just a footballer, he was proof that genius could smile back. And if this series can capture even a piece of that without hiding the harder truths, then Netflix may actually have something special here. So now I want to know what you think. Does Ronaldinho, the one and only, look like the kind of sports documentary that can capture why he felt different from almost everyone else? Or does it still have to prove it can go beyond polished nostalgia? That is the real test, and April 16th is very close. And that may be the biggest reason this documentary arrives at the right time. Football has become faster, louder, more branded, and more optimized than ever. Ronaldinho still represents the opposite memory. Not efficiency first, but delight first. Not control first, but invention first. A series like this only really works if it reminds people that what made him legendary was not just success, but the feeling that the game opened wider whenever he touched the ball.